Coming up next on the Union Label will be a conversation with Bill Lonergan, president of the Kentucky State AFL CIO. Welcome back. I'm Barry Craig, and welcome back, Bill Lonergan. It's been a while.
Great to be here.
Glad to have you back. Let's begin with a question I ask all of my guests on this show, and that is, it's a twofold question. First, what has organized labor meant to you personally? And in your view, what has organized labor meant to the American worker?
Well, for me personally, it's been a fulfillment of a dream of being able to represent working people. It's something that I've enjoyed doing, and something I've been honored to do because I am elected by workers throughout the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and it's a great honor to be able to work for working families and try to promote their interest against the odds that we're set up against now. As far as the labor movement is concerned, in general, of course, it's been the uplift of the workers in this country to provide them with a decent standard of living and decent wages, and the creation of the great American middle class. So I see the labor movement as that great counterbalance to the power of corporations that are interested in making profit and having workers make less money. So we're really interested in trying to promote the interest of workers, and we think that without the labor movement, workers would be totally on their own up against the system that is rigged against them.
Mm-hmm. How did you get involved? Tell us about your brief history, a brief history of your career in the labor movement.
Well, I've been involved with the labor movement for over 30 years now. Initially, I started out when I grew up east, and I was.
You're from New Jersey, aren't you?
I'm originally from New Jersey.
From where?
Jersey City,
okay.
An industrial part of the state. Where when I got out of high school, I was able to find a job working on the docks there in New York Harbor in the Longshoremen's Union. After working several years, I decided to go back to school, and eventually I got my labor studies degree from Penn State University. And after that, I was able to go to Washington and work with some of the national unions, ran organizing programs, did a lot of research, and through some twist of fate, I was able to come down to Kentucky. I was able to work here on different projects with the building trades unions, and was asked to come down and to work here. And have been here ever since 1988. Mm-hmm. When I first arrived, I worked with the building trades unions and got elected to run the Building Trades Council in Louisville. And I worked that job for over 8 years. And then the position of the state Fed president opened up, and I was asked to run, and was elected in 1999, and I've held the position ever since. And it's been a great joy for me to have that position, and I really appreciate the support that I get from workers throughout this Commonwealth for the things that we try to do to uplift them, to make their lives better, and to make their jobs safer, and to give them dignity on the job and a voice at work.
Mm-hmm. What do you think makes a good union official, from the shop steward all the way up to your job? Well,
I think the first thing they got to have is a passion for representing people and for doing this type of work. They have to have it in their gut and in their soul in order for them to be effective representatives, because you're usually up against a lot of different obstacles and such, and sometimes this work can get a little onerous. So you need to have a person that really cares about other people, and that's what we're all about, really, is caring about workers and making sure that their interests are protected.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the union, everyone is elected from the shop steward all the way up to you. It's a very democratic institution.
Well, that's correct. It's one of the few really democratic institutions that exist in our society. And, myself, I have to stand for election every 4 years, and we have a convention, and we bring delegates in from all over the Commonwealth, and they decide whether or not we're doing a good job. And luckily, they've been supportive of myself and Larry Jaggers, our Secretary-Treasurer, and we appreciate their support, and we would, continue doing this work for as long as they want us.
Mm-hmm. You obviously put a lot of miles on your vehicle, and probably wear a lot of shoe leather going from Kentucky is not a particularly large state, but it's a long state. From Ashland to Paducah is as we say in Kentucky, a fur piece. How much time do you spend on the road, percentage-wise?
Lots of time, probably 50%. We do have an office in Frankfort, and of course it varies depending on the time of the season. Of course, during the first several months of the year, most of our attention is taken up with the legislative session in Frankfort. So usually from January up until about March, most of our time is really spent in Frankfurt lobbying for bills that will help workers and trying to stop things that will hurt them. So, during that period we're in Frankfurt quite a bit. But the normal year, if it's an election cycle like this, we are on the road almost constantly, going to different work sites, going to different local unions in different cities throughout the Commonwealth, big or small, wherever we're able to go to talk to union members, that's where we go.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, that consists of hand-billing at plant gates, phone calling, mailings, labor-to-labor walks.
Right.
And I have seen statistics that show that this is very effective as a political tool.
It is very effective, and basically, we're up against that great machine of television that workers are seeing when they go home, and it's really our job to try and cut through all of the distraction that's put on TV and let workers know about the real issues. And we do that, as you mentioned, in several different methods, and of course one of them is just going to the work sites and distributing leaflets that spell out clearly the differences between candidates. We also
Are they surprised to see the president in a pair of jeans and a chambray shirt like that at a plant gate?
Well, sometimes people think, that somebody that's the president of the AFL CIO, maybe wearing a suit and tie all the time. But, I'm a worker, and I relate to the workers, and we don't want to be separated from those folks because we're part of them and they're part of us. So we try to at least show that we're not anywhere, trying to be above people. We want to make sure that they understand that we're all pulling together for them. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the way I actually do my job, is to try and, relate directly to workers and make them understand that, we're not any different from them just because we're holding these positions. And mm-hmm. We hate to see union reps become separated from the workers, because that's ineffective. Mm-hmm. So we really try to make sure that we communicate effectively and can talk directly to the workers and really share our experiences and thoughts with them. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, we do this during these election cycles through the leafleting, and we were just down at a paper mill, and we'll continue to go forward throughout the Commonwealth to work sites. Whether they're at shift change at 2 a.m., we'll stand out there and talk to workers as they go into work and come out. We'll have folks call them on the phone and talk to them directly at home, as well as doing what you mentioned, labor-to-labor walks, where we knock on their doors and talk to them directly and their families about the importance of getting out to vote and making sure they understand the issues and the differences between candidates. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And again, in rural states like Kentucky especially, that personal contact is really important. We're still sort of the old-fashioned campaigning, where you wear out shoe leather and you actually go door to door.
Well, and it makes a tremendous amount of difference, and you would be surprised at how many folks are so pleased that people actually care enough to come out at 2 a.m. or whatever their shifts mm-hmm. are, and to stand in front of them, whether it's cold out and whatever, and making sure that that we are communicating with them directly and trying to make sure they understand that the issues are very important to them as far as their family's concerned, and that they get out and vote for the candidates that are endorsed by their unions. So you're right; they really do appreciate that one-on-one contact, and it's
really
invaluable.
Do. A friend of mine, her husband was running for judge in one of the counties near here, and she had no experience in campaigning. She was an ex-newspaper reporter, and she went out one Saturday handing out the little cards, and she knocked on the door and handed a woman a card, and she says, "Well," she says, "I'll vote for your husband now, but if you hadn't come out with the card, I wouldn't have." That's that personal contact that people love.
Well, and that's why our program, what we call a labor-to-labor program, is so critical, and it makes a great difference. As you mentioned, workers appreciate getting that information, getting it directly from their union, and then they act on that, and they do that at a very high level. Union members and their families make up a significant portion of the electorate. In the last election cycle, where we polled our members, we made up about 24% of the total electorate that came out and voted. So that is one of our encouragements, is that when we can get union members and their families informed on the issues and we can get them motivated to get out and vote, we can make a great difference on Election Day.
Mm-hmm. Turnout, of course, is everything in elections, and something else too. And I've talked to union officers all across Kentucky, and I know you have too, is a lot of union members don't go to union meetings. They don't participate. How do you address that issue about participation? Why is it across the board, or how do you deal with that?
Well, I think, it's a societal issue, and as you know, several books have come out.
It is, and the book I recommend is Bowling Alone.
Exactly.
And it's not just unions. It's churches, it's civic organizations, it's campus clubs, it's everywhere. Why do you think people don't get involved and go to meetings anymore like they did when we were young?
Well, I think they're distracted. I think they have a lot of things going on. It's a very complex world. They're struggling to stay afloat and to keep their jobs. So I guess there's a lot of distractions out there, whether it's children and going to baseball games and things of this nature. And that's probably a challenge for us, of course, like everybody else, is to try and keep people focused on how important it is to have a strong union. And we still go out, and not only during the election cycle to talk to union members, but constantly throughout the year. We're trying to, build those relationships through the internet and using email and making sure that the members know what's going on in their union, in their community, and around the world because of the global economy. Mm-hmm. So we're out there distributing information and trying to talk to union members on a constant basis and trying to get them more and more involved. Mm-hmm. And, we're having great success actually bringing people back together by using these different methods of communication, which are available, and the younger folks are wired in, and we're trying to take advantage of that. So, we have an extensive database of emails that we utilize on a constant basis, sending out videos and sending out articles and different pieces of information that union members can benefit from.
That, I guess, is for us, the greatest revolution in politics and public affairs is the internet. Like a lot of people, I was slow to appreciate the value of this thing. But now, even you run for a local office, you've got a website.
That's right.
And so you have a webmaster, obviously, who does this.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, we have a website, ky.aflcio.org.
Okay.
And we encourage folks to go to the website. There's a great deal of information about elections and voting and endorsed candidates and a variety of different issues that are going on, whether it's trade, Social Security, retirement security, job safety, and things of that nature. So, we try to make that information available to folks. And with the internet, of course, it's just a couple keystrokes away. If you've got a computer and can get on the internet, then you can get access to all this great information that's out there. How to protect your rights on the job. The National AFL CIO and a lot of the international unions, of course, all have websites, and they use them extensively to inform folks about what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, even our area council, we have a website, and I'm sure others do across the country. But that is, to me, it's so amazing, the communication revolution that we're living in with that. Another thing, too, is the deindustrialization, if that's the word, of America in our part of the world. I live in Mayfield, and as I drive to work in the morning, I pass the rubble pile that was the Continental General Tire plant. We lost an Ingersoll Rand plant. What's the future of that?
Well, if things keep going the way they are, the future is going to continue to be more plants in rubble and less Americans having jobs. We're looking at 15 million Americans out of work right now. And without some sort of move to an industrial policy and a new trade regime that discounts so-called free trade in favor of fair trade, then I'm afraid that we're going to continue losing these good-paying jobs to these foreign countries, whether it's Mexico or China. We think that we need to have a complete revamp of our trade policies, which have done nothing but ship millions of American jobs overseas, because American workers, as you know, unionized workers are generally more highly paid than other workers. And of course, they're more vulnerable to being undercut by foreign competition, where workers are paid, a fraction or pennies an hour in different countries. So we see this as a real challenge to try and turn this free trade regime around and turn it into a fair trade where workers have a fair shot, not only here in the United States, but around the world. Because, this is what global exploitation is what we're facing right now with these global corporations taking advantage of the ability to move plants anywhere around the world and take advantage of countries and governments that don't support trade unions, that don't have safety and health laws, and don't allow workers the right to organize and things of this nature. So we're really pushing and have been as we oppose NAFTA from the beginning. We've opposed all those so-called free trade agreements, and we're doing that to this day. There's proposals up there to establish free trade agreements with Panama and Colombia and Korea. And as you know, in Colombia, they murder trade unionists at an alarming rate. So we don't see any value or reason for us to be having a fair trade agreement with a country that doesn't respect workers' rights and allows them to be murdered at an unbelievable rate.
Getting back to that tire plant, when I was a kid back in the 60s, if you graduated from one of the local high schools, you could either go to college or get a job in that plant. And the thing about those plants in our area was there was such a blessing, because in the old days you had to go to Detroit to get a job, and you could stay around here. And if you look at our town, Mayfield, our downtown, it's certainly not what it used to be. And that's true of a lot of places. There was a license plate that the AFL CIO of Kentucky put out years ago called "Union Wages Buy More."
That's right.
And if you were a kid and went to work at the plant, you went down to Bill Drivers and bought a Plymouth Roadrunner. Or if you were an older fella, you bought a house and appliances. And all of that pumped up the economy of this region tremendously. And you're absolutely right. The middle class in western Kentucky was built by these factories. And at this point, I don't know what kids are going to do. Our son's going to be graduating from high school. He'll go to college. But will he come back to Mayfield and do what? I don't know. And that's a real scary, really scary thing about the future.
Well, it is. And when you look at, like I said, 15 million people unemployed, where are they going to find these jobs? We've got all this, discussion about the green economy and transferring our economy into the green manufacturing and production. And, that may be happening, but it's happening kind of slowly. In the meantime, we've got so many people unemployed, and the lack of those opportunities that were out there when we were younger to go get a job in a factory, a decent paying job with benefits.
A lifetime job.
And those things are just simply disappearing at an alarming rate. And I don't think our country and our leadership has really decided where we're going to go in the next couple decades, where younger workers are going to work. They keep talking about the information economy and the service economy, but as you know, most of those jobs are low-paying jobs, and that's a problem, because without decent wages, we don't have the demand for products that people can purchase, and that's what drives our economy. And that's one of the major problems we have right now, is that lack of consumer spending and demand, because there's so many people unemployed, and wages have been decimated over the last several decades. As you know, we've had just completely flat wage rates, and most of the time declining. So people don't have what they used to have to go out and to make those purchases that drive our economy and allow these factories to make the goods that we could purchase.
There have been proposals, in fact, one recently, about some sort of disincentives for moving plants overseas. I would think that would really be a policy that would get traction, because I think wouldn't everyone be in favor of something to keep jobs in America, but yet that hasn't gone anywhere.
Well, as you know, the beneficiaries of that policy of shipping jobs overseas and giving tax breaks for corporations that do that is a completely ridiculous proposal or approach to our economy. And I guess one of the reasons why it hasn't gone anywhere is because these large corporations are the ones that benefit from the policy, and they're the ones that'll do everything they can to fight, any kind of changes along those lines. And they'll employ their high-priced lobbyists in Washington D.C. To try and thwart any legislative proposals that make them pay the taxes they should pay in this country, and help them maybe to bring back production to this country. So there's a a big fight that goes on almost every day in Washington and around the country with the interest of large corporations juxtaposed against the interest of average workers.
Mm-hmm. Case in point was Continental General Tire. Of course, as you know, General Tire was the American company, bought out by a German company, Continental AG. And Wayne Chambers, who you know, the last vice president of the Steelworkers Local 665, we were talking one day, and of course, Wayne was involved in efforts to keep the plant open. The union was just bent over backwards to try to keep that plant open, and Continental told them no, that they were going to build tires as cheap as they could. And Wayne told me the other day, I was looking in a newspaper, an advertisement for Continental tires. He said, they're more expensive than they were when they were made here. And he said that building the tire cheaply for the company didn't mean a cheaper tire for the consumer. And I thought that really said it all.
Well, you know, that's the rationale that they've used over the years to justify offshoring jobs. Well, the consumers of this country will benefit because they'll be able to buy cheaper garments or cheaper automobiles and such, you know. And when you look at it, as Wayne mentioned, in some that cheaper priced products really haven't really appeared in this country, I don't think. And so it's another one of the lies that's told about why we should offshore jobs and go to foreign countries to make products. Really, the bottom line is it's all about corporations making profits. And you know, once you understand that equation, you can see how they're motivated and why they engage in the practices that they do. You know, and it's kind of sad because a lot of cases they're making decent money in the United States, you know, making products. They're profitable organizations, but when they analyze it, they say they're not getting enough profits. So we can make a whole lot more money if we close this plant down and move it to Mexico and hire people that work a whole lot less for those in the United States so that we can make much higher profits. So, you know, the whole thing is driven, the whole equation is driven by trying to maximize those profits. And that's why unions are so important, is because we're the counterbalance to the interest of corporations to make profits and to be greedy.
Mm-hmm. And again, when you have to have consumers to buy these products, and you drive wages down to the point, which is what happened in the Great Depression. The purchasing power of the American consumer was driven to the bottom. Credit kept the thing going, and then the time came when people simply couldn't afford to buy what these companies were turning out, and the Great Depression resulted. Another thing too, and I know you studied history, back during the Depression, there were these public works programs. Why don't you think we have those? I mean, you go back to WPA, built the courthouse here in Paducah. The CCC built Columbus Belmont State Park. All these programs that were wonderful. People who, you still have reunions, the old CCC guys.
Sure.
Why don't we have that?
Well, right now I think we're engaged in this titanic struggle between the forces of capital, large corporations, and workers. You know, and their interest is to try and, you know, make sure that you know, they can make as much profit, maximize their profits and such, and they fight all of these approaches to try and do industrial policy or to implement programs that will employ people through the government. All we hear about is, you know, get the government out of the way, the government's no good. We're hearing that over and over again during these campaigns and these election cycles. Well, as you mentioned, the government was what was instrumental in pulling us out of the Depression. And I think...
I'll give you a case in point. My great uncle was a hillbilly from eastern Tennessee, made whiskey up in the mountains, moved to Cincinnati to try to find a job, couldn't find a job, was hired by the WPA, Works Progress Administration. They taught him to be a stone carver. He was a skilled stone carver. Went out and bought himself a little stone yard and had a very prosperous business making tombstones. And he was taught that by the WPA. They taught people to read and write.
Sure. They built some of the greatest public works projects that were, you know, that are in our country and still survive. And it's been distressing personally, for me, that we don't see much more of an effort to try and do that, because it, of course, uplifts and helps the workers that are looking for work and can't find any in this economy. It helps the country because we end up with things that are used by citizens, and it also just helps the government because we put more people back to work and they're paying taxes, and
and the theory behind that too was a job is more than a salary; it's dignity,
Sure.
It's self-worth. And my grandfather was a union carpenter in the Depression, couldn't find work at all. Well, he got hired by the WPA, sent to Paducah to clean up from the flood. That's something useful, and Paducah needed to be cleaned up from the flood. But that's something that you don't see these days.
No, we've heard about, we've done through the administration, have done the economic stimulus program that has resulted in a great many jobs being created and maintained. And there's some estimates about how high the unemployment rate would be without the stimulus money. But I have this feeling and that this just doesn't go far enough.
Right.
The way things are right now with the 15 million people unemployed, I think there's an opportunity here for the government to play a much bigger role and doing things like the WPA that put people to work and that give them training, it gives them some skills so that they will have a fruitful career in a different trade. So I agree with you that there should be a much more of a look at trying to change the way folks are working now and make sure the government can actually play a big role and put people back to work.
In the time we have left, if you would explain to the viewers who don't know that much about organized labor about the different kinds of unions. We have craft unions, industrial unions, public employee unions, all under the AFL CIO umbrella. Give us a little synopsis of that.
Well, of course, as the AFL-CIO, we are what you mentioned, an umbrella organization, which is essentially a federation. Sometimes I refer to it as a union of unions. And you have all of these unions out there representing workers in every job and occupation that you can imagine. Whether it is in public service, whether it's firefighters, whether it's teachers, factory workers, paper mill workers, mine workers. We run the gamut. All these folks in a sense have different jobs and different occupations, but they're all united around one thing, and that is the need to come together to speak with one voice in order to improve their job situation and their living conditions. So we don't differentiate so much of all these different unions. We see our folks working together, hand in hand in a united effort to try and uplift all workers. And as you know, what we do in a lot of cases really transcends affecting the union members. When we do lobbying and do legislative work, when we try to improve workers' compensation, when we try to make sure that they're not implementing negative legislation against workers, all these things usually affect all the workers. So we try to make sure that not only do we take the interest of union membership into consideration, that we take the interest of the wider community, the wider working class into consideration when we do the work that we do. So that when we try to elect politicians that are pro-working family, that they'll implement policies that are good for not only union members, but everybody that labors for a living.
We're out of time. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
My guest today was Bill Londergan, President of the Kentucky State AFL-CIO. I'm Barry Craig. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.